Good evening. Welcome to the launch of the Pevsner Nottinghamshire book with Clare and David, who you can see both on screen, Clare Hartwell and David Stewart. This is a joint event between Yale University Press and Five Leaves Bookshop in Nottingham. We were originally going to be having the book was going to come out somewhat earlier in the year, and we were probably going to have an event at a chapter house at Southwell or the Bishop's Palace in Southwell, and then we would spill out in summer weather onto the greens there. However, that didn't happen for obvious reasons, but the good thing is that you can attend this wherever you are, and you can also attend a book launch in your pajamas should you wish to. This event is live, but we'll also be showing it on our YouTube channel from roughly 3 o'clock on Monday, so you'll be able to see it again, but of course some people will be seeing it for the first time. For those of you unfamiliar with Pevsner, Pevsner guides are more or less the definitive guide to the buildings of Britain, with essays and a very useful glossary at the end for those of you unfamiliar with architectural terms. The series covers ancient and modern buildings. So tonight the format is that after I've introduced David, I'll very briefly introduce Clare as well, but David will be talking more about Clare. She'll speak for a short period, and then there'll be a question and answer with David, and then towards the end of the 45 minutes, we'll be taking questions from you. So during the whole process, if you want to type in questions in the Q&A section on your screen, you can also add things to the chat section on the screen, and later I'll moderate the questions. So David is a recently retired head teacher in Nottinghamshire, and he's been involved in the education and support of children and young people with severe learning difficulties for about 50 years. He's a deputy lieutenant in the county. His background is in medieval history. He's an honorary doctor at the University of Nottingham, and his research interests currently are on women's histories in the county. If you ever want to meet him, just go to Nottinghamshire Archives, he'll be there. Clare, who David will talk about in a minute, Clare has been working on Pevsner books for about 40 years. Her previous volumes include Derbyshire, the Manchester City Guide, the Lancashire Guide, the Cheshire Guide. She's an architectural historian. Although I believe she started off studying anthropology, because I think there's somebody coming tonight who was in your class at university, Michael Eaton. So I think that's all. The Pevsner Guide will sold out in our bookshop on the day of publication, which was really quite exciting, but I think we'll have copies back either tomorrow or Monday. The book's also available, of course, in other Nottinghamshire bookshops and orderable through your library. If you don't know our bookshop, we're in an alleyway just off Long Row. We also do mail order. We're in the part of Long Row which Clare completely and correctly describes in her book as being basically a desert of uninteresting shops. She wasn't talking about our shop, she was talking about the shop frontages, but enough about Primark. So please welcome David Stewart.
Thank you very much, Ross. Well, welcome everyone, and it's really good that so many of you have been able to join us for this evening. And welcome, Clare. It's an absolute delight to have you with us this evening for the Five Leaves launch of the latest edition of the Architectural Guide to Nottinghamshire. And I'm going to invite you now, Clare, to give us a brief introduction to your book before we enter into a discussion.
Thank you. Well, it's absolutely wonderful to be here, and I'm full of gratitude to Five Leaves for organising this so beautifully. My main regret is that I can't see everybody, so we'll have to do the next best thing. I've never done one of these before, so if something goes wrong, it's probably my fault. I wanted to start off to talk about the previous editions of this book, because of course that's what all my work is based on. And so I always like to think that somewhere in the ether Nicholas Pevsner is sort of hovering benevolently over. But his edition, which was actually published in 1951, it was the second in the entire series, was revised in 79 by Elizabeth Williamson. And since that time, of course, we've had Elaine Harwood's wonderful city guide. And I've built on these foundations as part of my work of revising the volume. And I'm extremely grateful, especially to Elaine, who helped me a great deal and looked over a lot of the work I did on Nottingham City itself. There were other people who I must mention now, and of course, for those of you who've had a chance to look at the book, I'm sure you'll see straight away how wonderful the photographs are. These were all done by the well-known architectural photographer Martine Hamilton Knight, who not only took the most wonderful photographs, but also identified buildings she thought were particularly interesting and photographed those and persuaded me they should go in. One of our favourites was Ompton Pumping Station, which is sort of like a set of huge slate pyramids. And Martine went to great lengths to make sure she photographed them when the field of wheat was the right colour to look like sand. And it's a wonderful, wonderful result. She was completely fearless, climbing up church towers, leaning over the parapets, lugging enormous quantities of photographic equipment with her. And I couldn't be more grateful. The other person I want to especially mention is Dr. Chris Brooke of Nottingham University. I think Chris approached me very early on in the process and offered to come along and asked what he could do to help. And really, he's been an absolute fount of knowledge. He's been helpful in every way, from looking over some of the work that I've done to arranging meetings. He seems to know everybody. And so I'm sure I would have had such a difficult time. Nothing would have been possible in the same way without him. I wish I could thank everybody individually. It would just not be possible. We'd be here all night. But so many people helped me, and I'm so grateful to them, from those who opened up churches for me to people who let me crawl around in their cellars and roof spaces. It's been, you know, absolutely wonderful. I think we've got a few pictures coming up, which I thought we'd have a quick look at now, if possible. And so I think you will all recognise this. And when I, came to meeting with the team at Yale and the Buildings of England to talk about the front cover, they asked me what I thought it should be. And I like to say that I replied that I couldn't decide whether it should be Southwell Minster or Southwell Minster. I still don't know the correct pronunciation, so whichever one you prefer, you'll have to bear with me. But I just think that not only does it in some ways, sum up what's so special about Nottinghamshire, it was also used on the very first edition. I don't know if you can see that, the little roundel which marked out the first edition books has got Southwell Minster there. And to me, it was one of the most special experiences, really, when you're approaching Southwell and then you see these enormous turrets, these towers rising from a fold in the landscape, and you know that you're looking at substantially the same scene that people have been seeing since the 12th century. It's very special. And I know we've got another slide. So we fast forwarded by several centuries, but this, I'm sure many of you will recognise, is Hopkins's Jubilee campus at Nottingham University, and I'm a huge admirer of this. I think it's very special. It's got a very human scale, it's got a warmth, and what I particularly like about it is the way in which it creates a sort of little environment alongside the water features, which gives people space. It's away from the traffic. Theoretically, it's away from the push bikes and skateboards. The main problem, of course, are the geese and swans. But I think it's hugely successful, and also has, of course, sustainable credits as well for the design. And another slide. Right, well, this is King Cole. I literally had no idea when I first started working in Nottingham of the story of Cole, and actually, you know, I just about missed it by the time I started work. The last mine closed in 2015, and almost all the pit head equipment is gone. This is one of only 2 or 3 exceptions, and this is the most incredible landmark. And these are 200 feet high. Martine had to balance on the top of her car to get this shot. They're a monument to an industry which was so important in Nottinghamshire history, and you know, which has left an enormous legacy as well. Including villages where, if you like, the livelihood for which they were built has been lost. And finally, so I had to have a picture of some stained glass. One of the reasons I chose this picture is because it is in the smallest, most insignificant little church you could ever hope to see. It's a tiny little place. And when you go in, you look round and it's such a shock to see this, which is a major work of art by Christopher Wall. And I think particularly special because this is actually his evocation of the Virgin of Southwell. You can see, I think, written at the bottom of the screen. And I absolutely love stained glass. I'm passionate about it. My editor's always telling me I can't have as many pictures as I like. And I think actually Nottingham's got a huge amount of fantastic stained glass, not just from this era, but right through to the present day, including wonderful medieval glass, interwar glass, and fantastic 1960s glass. And so, well, that's the end of my extremely short introduction, and some of my highlights.
Thank you very much indeed, Claire. Claire, this is a wonderful volume. I'm just showing it so everybody who hasn't seen it, they're beautifully produced with so much detail, excellent and clear photographs and drawings, and almost, you can see, twice the size of the previous edition. And I must say, very readable. Yet inevitably, there will be buildings not included. Claire, how did you make decisions about what to keep in?
Well, I think you've come at me with probably what is the most difficult subject, difficult thing for any author to do. You know, you go to so many places, they're so full of interest, and you often feel you could write almost an entire book just about that one town, or an extended article just about one building. But of course, you know, you simply can't, because the book is enormous, as you said, by which I mean it's over 800 pages, and any longer and it starts to become seriously unwieldy, and it is meant to be a guide. It's not meant to be, if you like, the last word on every building, but it's incredibly difficult, and I tend to probably write far too much, because I'd rather have too much and cut it down than miss anything out. It's also a question of learning about the area working in. And so when I first started working in Nottinghamshire, I was really struck by these fantastic brick farmsteads with wonderful dovecots, which I'd never really seen before. And I thought, oh gosh, fantastic, I must write this up, and spent, you know, ages writing the ones I saw up. And then after a while, I began to realise that there were hundreds of these, and it was necessary to be selective. And so it's a bit of both, really. And of course, the other thing is the writing style. I find I can't even write a postcard to my grandsons without trying to work out how to make it more succinct and condensed in its wording.
Thank you. And as an architectural historian, what would you consider to be the highs and lows of what you found in the county?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I mean, obviously there's some very obvious highs, aren't there? Like, I mean, Wollaton Hall, what an incredible place that is, and how wonderful it is that it's actually, if you like, in the public domain. Personally, I really like buildings that have got a lot of history to them and present a lot of puzzles. And so if you think of places like Newstead Abbey or Welbeck Abbey, you know, those are buildings which go back to the 13th century or before, and you know, you've got stuff that was put in only 100 years ago or less, and working through that puzzle is you know, really exciting and rewarding. So that's something I very much enjoy. For me, some of the villages were fantastic. Places like Colston with huge green. I've never seen anything like it. And when I got there, there were beasts grazing upon it, which is a sight I don't think I've ever seen before. One of my favourite places is West Stockwith. It's a tiny little village right up in the north of the county. And when you go there, you'd never really believe it had been such an important place, because it used to be a port. Well, it still is a port, arguably. There's an interchange between the Chesterfield Canal and the River Trent. And I was talking to the lockkeeper there, and he said, oh yes, he said, you've got to make sure that people understand when they come out of the Chesterfield, they're going into a tidal river. Because of course the Trent is tidal from that point, and people were building ships there and they were setting sail, you know, across the North Sea. The little church there has got a monument in it to a local shipwright with a sort of picture of a ship that he's designed. It's an absolutely wonderful place. I mean, you know, you could go on. There's so many delights, and I think that was one of the things that really struck me when I started work here, was that I knew so little about what there was in the county. Oh, you asked me Downs as well, did you?
Yes.
Okay, well, I think that, you know, nobody likes to see a building which has come to the end of its useful life, and nobody likes to see a building for which a new use can't easily be found, and so it's facing an uncertain future. And I mean, I've seen buildings, and I've seen them over the years as I happen to have driven past them, and it's very sad to see something where you feel it's not facing a very secure future. Otherwise, it's something I've already mentioned, which is going into the Nottingham coalfield and seeing there's been massive economic changes in a very short space of time, which has affected whole communities.
Massively, massively. You've written other books in the Buildings of England series, Clare. How did you first become involved in the series, and when did you start work on the Nottinghamshire book?
Well, I lived in Manchester. I did my postgraduate degree in Manchester, and it was really through my teachers at Manchester University, which are John Archer and Ron Brunskill. I think that sort of started me on this. And I started by writing the City Guide to Manchester, which is so long ago and so incredibly out of date now. It's almost unbelievable. But it was an absolutely fantastic experience. And I suppose from that, I found that I liked that kind of work. I enjoy writing and enjoy, I won't say I enjoy working on my own, because that's not really true, but I can do it, you know, it's something which comes easily to me. And so I wrote several more, or co-wrote them in the series, or I should say revised them. And I was trying to work out when I started work on Nottingham. Actually, no, I think it was in March 2016, because I was looking through my photographs to try and find what the earliest one was. I had a picture of the centre of Mansfield in it. And I know I went to Mansfield early on, and my picture shows pouring rain and two people standing next to a stall that says hot peas and shellfish. I mean, I had literally never heard of that. I thought, I'm entering unknown territory here. But funny enough, I've never ever seen a stall since selling those things, so it must have been one.
And obviously, Nottinghamshire schools all teach that Wollaton Hall was built on the profits of coal. Do you think more should be made of the Nottingham buildings built on the profits of hosiery and lace, of course reliant on the slave picked cotton?
Okay, well, you know, I think that it doesn't matter what your specific interest in history is. I think all historians would promote history and want to promote an understanding and appreciation of history. And I think that, you know, that can go awry. And one of the things that I was really amazed by, I worked in Manchester, lived in Manchester for a very long time, and I used to take tours, and obviously the tours would be of the cotton mills and the industry there. And I was genuinely amazed when I found that sometimes people actually really genuinely didn't know of the connection between the textile trade, the importation of raw cotton through the slaving port of Liverpool, and the fact that it was picked by enslaved peoples in the Americas and the West Indies. Education. That's
it is, yeah. It's really important, isn't it? And because we're one removed from Manchester, you know, the cotton was brought here. I think people do forget where our industries and those industries, of course, led to the building of some wonderful buildings in the county. Claire, are there any 20th or 21st century buildings or architects which stand out for you in Nottinghamshire?
Gosh. Well, 20th and 21st century, I think Nottinghamshire is such an interesting county because it's basically got one huge city and it's sort of spreading suburbs, which is Nottingham. And obviously there are conurbations, the Ashfields and so forth, but an awful lot of it is tiny villages. And so you tend to get, if you like, this sort of big statement, expensive architecture concentrated in the cities and the larger places. So if I mention them, it's not because I'm sort of favouring them geographically. But I mean, there's so much, isn't there? The Playhouse is something which you know is really, really remarkable for the sort of that similar sort of 1960s period. I think the Gerard Golan's church of the Good Shepherd in Arnold, which is sensational. It's a sensational construction in which you've got walls of a type of stained glass called dalle de verre, huge, great big, thick pieces of glass, making up patterns representing the tree of life. I mean, what an amazing experience to see that. But coming sort of, you know, more towards the present day, and there's so much, isn't there? I think I was, as I've said, hugely impressed by Hopkins buildings at Jubilee, but also by the tax offices, which are probably the sort of amongst the first buildings I was sort of conscious of on my first visit to Nottingham. You come past on the train and you see them straight away. But for the 21st century, well, I think one of the most interesting things is the whole concept of sustainability and how you incorporate that in architecture. And so how you can produce really good architecture, as well as really inventive responses to the problems of climate change and the need to create a sustainable environment. So the new houses at Trent Basin by Marshall Wachowski are one example of that.
Thank you. And in the course of your travels around the county, were there any experiences which stand out for you? You've already mentioned some, but were there any actual experiences of when you were going around the county? Because it's a wonderful privilege to do so.
It's an incredible privilege, and actually, I think some of the sort of most memorable experiences very much are to do with the people that you meet. And so one of my most memorable site visits was going to the Holy Cross Convent near Costock, which is an enclosed Anglican Benedictine order. And I was shown around by Sister Mary Julian. I had never been anywhere like that before. It's a very special thing to get an invitation to see somewhere like that. And what had happened was that it was a very recent building. They'd moved from another building more towards the south of the county. Their architect, John Fuchs, had worked with them, adapting farm buildings. And so you'd somehow got this sort of fusion of the idea of a sheltered fold, you know, where the lambs will be looked after on a farm, with the idea of a medieval cloister and that architectural arrangement. I mean, I just thought it was wonderful. Then there was the time when I was climbing up the inner workings of the tower at the Minster with Chris Brooke, and the lights went off. in an extremely dark spiral staircase. We couldn't find our phones. That was quite an experience. And as I said, the people who asked you about, I went to one hugely interesting house, and they said, oh, well, you'll need to see the cellar, you know, we think there's medieval foundations, but it was flooded, so I had to borrow a pair of Wellington boots and sort of wade through to have a look at these walls, which I think were medieval, actually. People often think that the cellars are going to be your first interest, but actually, in many cases, it's the roof space that you really want to see. And I'm surprised at the number of people that, you know, almost without blinking an eyelid said the attic. All right. Yeah, I mean, so many memorable experiences. Yeah. And of those, perhaps, you know, what I remember is just how helpful, kind and wonderful people were, giving me cups of tea and lending me their wellies and so on.
I suppose that brings me to sort of ask you, you're very generous in your introduction and you thank a wide range of people. How important is it to you, the team that you work with, when you're compiling the guide?
Well, the team tends to evolve as you go on. Obviously, I am in touch with my fellow Pevsner authors. So every now and again, you know, a photograph will do the rounds and people will say, have you ever seen a font like this? Or what kind of fireplace do you think this is? And so we've got a little community. We've also got people actually at the Buildings of England desk at Yale University Press. And so my editor, Simon Bradley, you know, also very willingly answers queries and makes suggestions. And I think that it's the people, you know, when you come to work in somewhere like Nottingham, there's a huge network of information. And so it's things like the Thoroton Society, like the Civic Trust, all the expertise that's in the different university departments. And as soon as you either reach out, or people often, you know, spontaneously get in touch when they find out about the project, then your team starts to come into place. So that's the field work, that's the research, you know, very much a collaborative effort. And when it comes to production, you know, I write the book, I send it to my editor. He says it's too long, usually, but then editorial work is done, and then we go into production. And so Linda McQueen is the production editor. She's been absolutely fantastic. She makes sure it all happens and pulls it together. Alice Blows did a lot of work on picture research, and so I say, oh, I want a picture of this brass or that church plan or something, and Alice had to kind of march off to the British Library to try and find it for me. So yeah, it's a joint effort, very much.
A final question from me. We want to encourage people to hone their appreciation of historic and modern architecture. What guidance would you give, Claire?
Well, obviously I'm going to say buy my book, aren't I?
Absolutely.
I just think look around you, and if you're curious, you'll find out a way of finding out about it.
Thank you very much indeed, Claire. And I'm going to ask Ross now if you'd like to put some of the questions that people have sent to you.
Thank you. I'll do that just in a second, but one or two people have on the chat room referred to Southwell and Southwell. We, some years ago, was involved in setting up the then Southwell Poetry Festival, and we had a writer in residence called Andy Croft, who came from Middlesbrough, or Middlesbrough if you prefer. And he said initially, so what's this place actually called that I'm writer in residence for, because I'm hearing Southwell Southwell. And he did some research, and some people said it was insiders, outsiders, some people said it was working class, middle class. He didn't get an answer, so he wrote this wonderful poem about a town that didn't know what it was called. It's a really good poem if you want a copy of it. And of course he referred to Middlesbrough, Kirkcudbright, and so forth. Anyway, questions. There's plenty of them. I hope we'll manage to get through them. Easy one first. What was the first book in the series?
Oh, Cornwall. And so, but actually Nottingham was done more or less at the same time. And you probably can't see this, but on the spine there, it says BE2. BE1 was Cornwall, BE2 was Nottinghamshire rather. And I think Pevsner wanted to do somewhere, you know, two very different places, Cornwall with a coast, Celtic, Nottingham without a coast, Danish, Anglo-Saxon in its background. Yeah.
The first question was from Jenny Swan. This is from somebody called Rob. But why did he attach so much importance to Nottinghamshire? Was it simply the contrast, or did he have a specific interest in Nottinghamshire?
Well, I'm not really sure, actually. I suppose the thing to do would be to consult Susie Harry's biography of Pevsner, which is very illuminating, actually, because he had a bit of a bad time in Nottinghamshire. He got rained on, his car broke down, the hotel smelt of cats, it went on. So I don't really know, but I do think it may have been in order to do two contrasting areas as a kind of trial run.
So I'm just on the chat, John Beckett is saying that he did not because of Southwell and the leaves.
Oh, well, that's quite possibly true, yeah.
John Smith says an earlier Pevsner volume and indeed Alan Sillitoe rated Broadway and the Lace Market as Nottingham City's most attractive street. Do you think that is true?
Attractive, that's an interesting word. I think if you're an architectural historian, it's difficult to narrow it down to being attractive, if you know what I mean, because to me it would be interest. I think that the Lace Market is absolutely extraordinary, and I would certainly keep that there. Broadway, it's an interesting thought. I don't know, really. I really like some of the streets which have got such a big mixture of buildings. I'm a long row until you get to the desert of, of the far end, where you've got a sort of mixture of all different architectural styles. But yeah, Broadway's pretty interesting as well. I can't choose.
We're not going to press you on that. This is from Andrew Cooper, all the way from Bristol. He's asking about Nicholas Hawksmoor, who is Nottinghamshire born, which I didn't know, and which many people, I suspect Andrew, considers to be the greatest ever British architecture. Did he have any professional involvement in the county after he left? Andrew says the standard textbook on Hawksmoor suggests he did some work in Nottingham, but without any details. Do either of you know that? Anything?
I know that he's reputedly brought up in a farming family, a rich farming family near Ragnall. But if he did undertake anything professionally in the county, I am certain it doesn't survive.
Okay. If anybody knows that, email in or put it on chat if you know tonight.
And can I say that if anything does survive, I can be sacked immediately. I didn't find it.
Modern question, the tax offices near the station may default to flats as the new green aluminium and glass office block is built by the station. Any views on that? That's from local councillor Michael Edwards.
Well, I think it's an extraordinary building or set of buildings. And I suppose that most buildings fare best when they're in the use for which they were designed. I don't know how they would be changed in order to incorporate flats. So it seems pity they're moving out, because it doesn't seem that long since they were specifically designed for them. But obviously, if they have to go, then it's wonderful if a new use can be found, which keeps their architectural integrity.
Okay, Mike, you might want to add something on chat if you want people to have your views on that. From David Lerman, this is a question to Clare about access. Did you have any difficulties of access from owners in Nottinghamshire compared to your previous volumes? I don't know if there's a story behind that question, but.
Well, sometimes you get problems of access. I don't think it's a good idea for me really to start identifying places that I had trouble getting into. It's gone there. Almost everywhere, at the very least, you can look at the outside of the building. Some people feel that they've got a very, very private life, and they really just don't want anything outside coming into that. But compared with other counties, I would say it's probably about equal. I mean, you get places where occasionally people don't want you to let you look round, but by far and away the majority couldn't be more helpful. And so, for example, when I was working in Derbyshire, I had to climb across their electric gate because I couldn't make it work. Arrived at the front door holding up the Pevsner, and the door opened and a voice came in saying, "Anyone with a Pevsner is welcome here, come in." That's much more usual, that kind of thing.
I'm going to try that wandering around the county in general from now on. Anybody's house that I want to have a look at their interior design. Underrated towns in the county. Actually, I'll ask both of you that, because David might have a view on that too.
Do you want to go first, David?
This is from John Reed.
So the question was asking about,
which do you think is the most underrated town in the county in terms of its architectural merit?
Well, I think in terms of our knowledge, it's probably places to the north of the county. I don't know what you felt about Worksop and Retford, Claire, in terms of the architecture there.
Well, I think you're right, really. I mean, I suppose I always think that everybody must know Newark, which of course is fabulous. But actually, Retford is such an interesting place. It's got such fantastic buildings. I really enjoyed exploring that. Worksop too, but I think Retford's got this huge marketplace, and it is a sort of two places in one. There's East Retford and West Retford, and they've each got a church. And it's absolutely bristling with almshouses. Everybody there was obviously in competition to prove how charitable they were. And it's got, really important examples of almshouses. It's got, a town hall, which I don't think Pevsner was much of a fan, actually, but it's a really characterful building. So I would agree with you on that, I think, yeah.
And I think that's where the guide comes in, because it sort of encourages us to look further than the usual places, like you say, with Newark or Nottingham or whatever, but it encourages us to look further afield.
I think that's true. And I worked around the county for 10 years, working for the county council, and there are places, and never mind the buildings, there were entire places in the book that I'd never visited, never even heard of. And so once we can wander more around, I'll have it in my metaphorical glove compartment. I don't drive, so that might be difficult, but there we go. Did you make any significant discoveries about Nottinghamshire architecture, Claire, when you were wandering around? That's from Matthew.
Gosh. I don't think there was anything that would sort of make the national headlines, but I did find out things which were, immensely rewarding in some ways. I mean, sometimes it's just little things, by finding out the name of an architect who specialised in Methodist chapels, and then you can track him across the county as you find more of his buildings. That's very satisfying. I think that I spent a long time looking at St Mary Magdalene, a very long time looking at that church, which is an extraordinary building. And I think that there were some aspects of the development and of the furnishings in that church which, is new research really as a result of my investigations. So I'm very excited about that. Yeah, I mean, I think that probably would be the one that I'm, if you like, proudest of. But also just places, as I said, I think that somewhere like Newstead Abbey is really well understood. There's been people who've been studying it for a long time. Somewhere like Welbeck Abbey isn't nearly as well understood, really. And, I felt that there was evidence there which suggested that there was lot of more work left by Robert and John Smithson than perhaps people have realised. So, yeah, little things, lots of little things, only a very few sort of bigger things, if you like.
We're running low on time, and we've got lots and lots of questions. We're going to have to try to think of a way of perhaps putting them on our, attach them to the YouTube channel for next week if we can, or our Facebook site. Some way that we can use these. So I'm not going to be able to ask every question for lack of time. Lucy Brower, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, conducts walking tours at Victorian architecture in Nottingham, and particularly that of Watson Fothergill. Did you investigate his work and its novelties?
Yes, Fothergill Watson, or Watson Fothergill, a man who changed his name partway through his career. What an amazing person he was. His buildings are just extraordinary, and I'm sure that Lucy probably knows them in much more detail than I do. But yes, he's an example. This is what you find, isn't it, when you start looking at places, and we talked a little bit about some of the lesser known towns. You come across people that perhaps haven't really made it onto the national stage. They haven't needed to, because they've been so successful where they come from. And I think that Watson Fothergill is a really good example of that. I think his buildings are a constant source of delight. So yeah, absolutely wonderful.
There is a really nice book about Watson Fothergill, or Fothergill Watson, which doesn't have an ISBN. It's really frustrating if you're a bookseller, but we stock it, and I'm pretty sure the other local bookshops do as well. I need to ask you a question on behalf of Matt W. How does she feel architectural historians should respond to the removal of the Colston statue in Bristol if part of Nottingham's architect is found to be more directly linked to the slave trade than David talked about earlier? How do we balance the need to preserve architectural heritage with supporting Black Lives Movement? That should occupy most of the rest of the discussion.
Well, it would do, but I actually feel as if I don't really know. And I think it's okay to say that you don't really know, because it's not the kind of thing that you can make an instant judgment on. You know, I think I said before when we were talking about the history of the cotton and textile industry, that what we need is an understanding of history. And I think that is perhaps first and foremost what's required. It's a hugely difficult a question, isn't it? And so, you know, I'll tell you, I don't tell many people this, but I absolutely love the music of Wagner. The reason I don't tell many people is because Wagner is associated with reprehensible anti-Semitic ideas. But then, you know, isn't it also true that many figures from the past come from such a different era that you've got to try to understand what that era means? I can't answer that question. I think you probably have to take it on a case-by-case basis, and I don't know what the right answer is.
You do realise, Claire, that you've just told the entire internet about your views on Wagner, rather than not telling very many people. Everybody knows now.
You can like the music and disapprove of the person.
Indeed. The castle, Nottingham Castle. Tom Blair asking here. Comments on Nottingham Castle.
Oh, sorry, you just want to comment on Nottingham Castle?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, yes, I thought there was more to it than that. Nottingham Castle, what an incredible building. And what do we mean by the castle? I mean, we've got a multi-layered site there with some medieval parts. And of course, then on top of that, it's all crowned by this sort of bizarre Renaissance palace. It's an extraordinary concatenation, perhaps is the right word, I don't know, of different elements. I know there's a huge amount of interest in all the caves and the interconnecting caves underneath. And of course, I've never actually seen the main building operating as it should, because when I started my research, they were already taking it all down for the project. And so yeah, it's an extraordinary building, and I'm looking forward to seeing it coming back to being a museum and art gallery in the way that it was been intended since about 1874.
Yeah, I'm really interested in what they'll do with their historic holdings of art in the format of the traditional local authority gallery, but they do have some excellent paintings there, which are often in storage. What I think will have to be the last question, which is sort of merging 2 or 3 questions that people have asked, is about Pevsner's very sharp opinions that he had. How do you cope with having a different opinion to him? Do you find it? Did you find it easy to challenge his views? Retford Town Hall has been mentioned. 1 or 2 other places have been mentioned. I think this is a general question, just not just a Nottinghamshire question. Do you feel that you could overrule him in your view?
No, not overrule at all. I think it's possible to have a different opinion. And I think that you always want to keep as much what Pevsner wrote as possible. And so if it's something which I sort of strongly feel there's an alternative point of view that's worth considering, you can put something in inverted commas, Pevsner thought this or Pevsner thought that. That doesn't necessarily imply that you disagree with it, but it allows him to speak directly. Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite difficult, really, but the idea is that we're revising Pevsner, we're not rewriting it. And I think there's plenty of room to express one's own views within those parameters as well. I mean, it's a huge privilege to be able to be involved in a project like this, and Pevsner was a towering figure. Yeah, you want to keep everything that you can that he said, and of course it's okay to disagree with it. It's a question of how, I suppose, you find a way of putting it across.
David, do you want to add anything?
Yeah.
Claire, is there anything you want to finish with?
Claire, would you like to, any final words before we conclude?
Well, I suppose, thank you all so much for taking part in this, and yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful working in Nottinghamshire. I've really enjoyed it. I've met so many wonderful people who've helped me greatly, and I've been introduced to fantastic architecture.
Thank you. Well, this just leaves me now to say some thanks. Thanks to you, Claire, for giving us further insight into the Nottinghamshire Guide. It's been really informative, so thank you. And we can all fully recommend it to everybody, I think. So those of you who've been fortunate enough to join us this evening, please buy the book and pass your views on to others. Thank you to everybody for those questions too. Really useful. And I think Ross's idea of putting further questions on is an excellent idea. Thanks to the team from Yale for all their support in making this event happen tonight, and to Ross and Pippa from 5 Leaves. And I just hope you all enjoy this splendid new volume of Nottinghamshire. Just wonderful. So at this point, I would like to thank you for joining us tonight, and I wish you all well. Stay safe. Thank you.